Remember, the Romans killed Jesus, not the Jews. Jews believed in Jesus, just not as the Son of God. No. Did the Romans carry out the actual act of nailing Jesus to the cross? Yes. But the Jews called for his execution. Maybe you forgot that whole story, like that story where Pilate had, what is it, Barbaros? Is that how you pronounce it? He had that criminal that had murdered people, and he was going to release one of them, and on the other side of him he had Jesus, and he said, which one do you want me to release? One's going to go free. And all the Jews called for Jesus to be, the criminal to go free. A lot like what our government does today, let all the criminals go free and persecute the people that have done nothing wrong. So no, it was the Jews that called for his execution. Now, Jesus was Jewish, and his followers were Jewish. But when it came to the Jewish leaders, the scholars, the heads of the church, they called for his execution. And I think personally, it had to do, because they knew enough. They knew he had performed miracles. They were there. But he interrupted their lifestyle. He did. He did, because Jesus said, drop everything. Drop your riches. Drop everything and walk with me. And people, that's why Jesus said it's harder for a man with riches to get into heaven. Because they can't let go of the attachment of riches. So, and with the Jewish leaders back then, they were, it was all about them, because they were the ones that, everybody looked to when they came in the marketplace, except they were using the temple, to sell shit that really pissed Jesus off. That's when the only time Jesus got angry was when he went, into the temple, and they were using it to sell stuff, that's why he flipped tables. Yeah, the son of, he was God incarnate. Because nobody could perform those miracles that all of them saw, that they wrote about. Again, the reason we have the 4 Gospels and they're similar is because those would hold up in court as evidence, because they all say the same thing. Now, you get tons of people that whether they walk with wicked or they're being influenced by it, who knows, but that want to say, oh, it's been changed. No, there's a reason for the Holy Spirit. Put it together, people. Put it together. There's a reason for the Holy Spirit. That is what is your discernment tool. But you can't have discernment unless you know unless you know what that Holy Spirit's all about. So what's really sad is here was God incarnate in front of all of them. And yes, there's plenty of people that knew. But it's sad, isn't it? Because they didn't want him. They didn't want God. But those same Jewish scholars, and many others really, but went on to still not see the truth to this day. Proving really the Old Testament altogether. They create their own ideas of what everything means and disregard all the proof Jesus gave. In my opinion, because they didn't want, the leaders of the church back then, they were seen as God, and they were intertwined with the government, really, but they were seen as God in many ways because they were put on such a pedestal. So they didn't want the real God coming back and, messing things up. Think about what the world would be like had it not been Jesus's path to be crucified. Does anybody ever think about that? What the world would have been like. But Jesus knew that that's what they'd do to what the own people that he created would do to him. That's how wicked we are. That's how wicked of a world we live in. Even today, if Jesus came back and was walking the earth, you have a bunch of people saying, I don't got time for that. I got to get to work. You literally would. Does that surprise anybody? No. That's what people would do. They'd blow it off. I don't have time for that God thing. Or blow it off as not believing it. And so Jesus made a specific path for people to know the truth. But There's a ton of people, they're in the Ivy Leagues, they're in the universities of higher education who don't have a brain. They think they have a brain and they don't. That stand on, they're the ones in the science, they all stand on the outside not understanding this God thing because they didn't go the path. Yeah, Jesus has a specific scientific path for it. And if you don't do it, if you don't understand it and you don't do it, then you can't be making judgments about there not being a God. This is what has really, in my opinion, it destroyed the science, because the science has said we have no proof of God. So just because the science and people at the World Economic Forum and people that have a love of money and power have said that they're science experts and the university say there's no God. No, none of you went the path that Jesus laid out. It made it really simple. You didn't want to go that path because the same as the Jewish leaders of the church back when Jesus walked the earth. You didn't want that interrupting your lifestyle. No, you have power, you have money, you have prestige. Why do you think it's the poor, it's the meek, it's the people that struggle in this world that do go that path? And you want to call it silliness. No, it's just you can't find the path because you've never attempted to go down it. So when science tries to say there's no God, all I think of is the Jewish leaders back when Jesus walked the earth. You're no different. You're deciding for the rest of us all because you chose not to believe. Not even believe. You can have the proof of that, but you have to go the path Jesus recommended. None of them have. Has Noah Yuval Harari, who, the World Economic Forum loves to put on some pedestal, he's the most empty person ever, and yet, he wants to continue to say that we don't have proof of this God thing. No, you don't. You don't. Let's make it clear. You don't have proof of it. There's millions of people in the world that do, but you want to ignore those millions of people because you're a moron and you're no different than the leaders of the Jewish church back in the day who didn't want God to come back. Not really. Yeah, they wanted God to come back and cause storming to the Roman Empire, get rid of everybody, do everything that they wanted him to do. But they didn't want him to come back when, they didn't want him anymore once he said, no, I'm not here to fix the government. Yeah, isn't that a lot of the reason why people didn't want to walk with Jesus? Is because, he said, I'm not here to fix the government. Because there's no fixing it. There's no fixing it. But that wasn't what Jesus' first time here was about. It was about reaching the people that he knew could still hear. And he knew those people then would be filled with the Holy Spirit, that to this day the science can't kill, but the science themselves don't know. Yet what is put on a pedestal in this world is the science. The same way back in the day, the Jewish leaders were put on a pedestal. So no, the Jews actually were the ones that Jesus wouldn't have been crucified had it not been for the Jews. So even though the Jews didn't carry out the physical act, it was they that called for his execution. Even some of his followers didn't have enough to stand up for him. He said that in the Bible. If this was my kingdom, my people would stand up for me. That's what Jesus said. But even the people that knew who he was were afraid to stand up for Jesus against the government or against the Jewish leaders of the church. Yeah, we're no different now. And so it wasn't the Romans. The Romans carried out the act that the Jewish leaders called for.